Hi, you've probably done a survey before. You'll probably have to do a survey sometime in your life. So I'd like to talk to you about 12 ways of improving your surveys. And I've written them on the screen to kind of help us focus in and keep this tutorial short. First one, fundamental flaw in many surveys, in fact almost all surveys, is that there's no particular benefit for a truthful answer or cost for an untruthful answer. My favorite story of this that illustrates this is some years ago there was a woman in Texas, and she was the only voter in an election that decided about a $10 million bond issue. And in this case, she mentioned that she had never studied an issue as much as she had studied this one. She felt that she definitely wanted to make the right decision. Now, I don't believe that she was going to bear any cost if they didn't develop or didn't issue this bond, or if the bond wasn't paid off. But she was the one to decide whether it was put out. It was for new development for sewers and roads, and so she felt responsible. She was the one making the decision. We'd often find that, much like an election, where a lot of times when people are in an election, they're not really making the decision themselves. It's among thousands of other people, so they have very little input. So they don't often take care in terms of thinking through what they really think personally. They have other things going on in their life, and why spend time working on this? Number 2, use simple and clear wording. I don't know how many times I've read a survey where I've wondered what exactly they've meant. It was unclear, there was grammatical errors, the questions were long, and a lot of times I couldn't remember the first part of the question. So make sure your questions are clear. Number 3, priming. Priming means to induce people to answer a certain way because of how the questions are worded. So if I ask a question about, what do you think of this evil, selfish, lazy, conceited politician? Well, I'm kind of priming this question primes for a pretty negative answer. One of my favorite stories that has to do with priming is the story of Lily Tomlin. And she told a classic joke that if olive oil comes from olives and peanut oil comes from peanuts, where does baby oil come from? Well, hopefully it does not come from babies. So make sure you do not prime people for a certain answer. Anchoring. Let's bring anchoring up here. Number 4, anchoring. Now, people can be anchored to the original number presented to them. If you ask people what the population of Egypt is, and let's say it's 60 million people, and if you ask them, do you think it's greater or less than 10 million? Most people will answer greater than 10 million. And then if I ask them, well, what do you think the population is? They'll stay fairly close to 10 million. In fact, I've done this before, and most of the answers I get are 30, 40 million. But if I start at 100 million and ask, is the population of Egypt greater or less than 100 million? Most people would answer less than 100 million. And then the answers I get when I ask them, what do you think the population is be 80 or 90 million. People tend to anchor into those original numbers and don't move very far from those. Vividness. Material that has been presented recently in an emotional way may cause people to feel that it's a bigger problem. So, for example, if I show pictures of dead fish along a riverbank after a spill of gasoline into the water, people are going to remember that a lot more than if I just show the river and say, okay, here's the river where gasoline spilled into the water. So I'll tend to get very different results on my survey. Likewise, I was reading a story about somebody who worked with trying to get relief to Africa, and they mentioned that until there were actually dead bodies, it was often very hard to get help because the dead bodies tend to be very vivid, versus if people weren't quite dead or bloated, that it wasn't vivid enough, and so that they tended to have much different responses than later on when it became very vivid. Positive analogies. Many people will answer positively when there's positive analogies, or more negatively if there's negative analogies. For example, let's say that people remember the Vietnam War as a very negative experience, and we're thinking about going into Bosnia, which happened a few years ago, and we use Vietnam War as the analogy of saying, look, we could get stuck in there much like we got stuck into Vietnam. There's a lot of people who died, and then at the end, Vietnam still fell. Well, that will tend to imply that don't go into Bosnia, versus if you had given the analogy of saying, look, we've gone into other places, we've saved lives, gotten out fairly quickly. That analogy is going to be much more positive in terms of intervening in Bosnia. Halo effect, number 7. When people or a group is judged based on one aspect, then you generalize to other aspects. That's the halo effect. For example, let's say that Princeton University does not have a business administration major, but if I did a survey that asked, what do you think of the quality of the business administration undergraduate degree at Princeton University, I'll probably have a lot of people that answer, probably very high quality, just because of the reputation of the university, even if the department does not exist. So be careful on halo effects. You might get a very different answer just because of people's view of the person or thing. It could be a negative answer, it could be a positive answer. Number 8. Avoid asking more than one question in the same question. So I probably don't want to ask something like, do you have a gun and do you support gun control? Those are two separate questions where people could answer positively to one, negatively to another. They should be two separate questions. Make sure that you include all possible answers, including, I don't know. I have had this situation where I've started answering a survey, and the answers they gave me were leading to a certain answer, and I was like, none of these represent what I think. And they don't even include the idea of, I don't know, I don't really have a position on this thought. I haven't really thought about it, or I'm kind of indifferent between several of them. So be very careful that you include the possible answers. And including one, like, I don't have an answer. I don't know what I would think. Number 11. Pre-test your questions with a small group. Often I will write a survey and I'll find that what I thought is not how other people interpreted it. Or when I write articles, almost invariably, I have to have somebody read my article to see things that I didn't see when I wrote it. I had certain preconceptions that people would interpret a certain way, and they don't. So pre-test it. See what other people think. Number 11. When certain answers are not socially desirable, allow people to answer anonymously. And especially, assure them that their answers are completely confidential. For example, you probably don't want to ask somebody about their extramarital affairs in front of their spouse. You probably don't want to ask people about other things that they feel embarrassed about, and because they'll probably not answer honestly. It needs to be something that's confidential. So let me go down here. Some ways of doing this is identifying them only by a code number, so their answers can't be traced back to them, assuring them of their confidentiality. You probably don't want to interview them face on face. Their answers should not be recorded in an interview, but rather using a computer terminal or paper questionnaire. Number 12. And our last one of our top 12. Think about what your assumptions are when you write the survey. A lot of these assumptions could be wrong. So for example, You might be thinking about something and actually be having a problem of multiple causation. And multiple causation means that something may be caused by several things, or something may cause several things. So in the case of multiple causation, there may be more than one reason a person's unemployed. Likewise, there could be several reasons why somebody is getting good grades, such as people who tend to get good grades they might be smarter, it comes more easily to them. They might have better health, and so they're able to focus better. They might be studying longer. And so there might be several things or multiple things that are causing them to have good grades. And you might be asking about just one of them, but think about what are some of the other things that might cause it. Reverse causation. Reverse causation is when we see a correlation between event A and event B. And we might assume A causes B. And so we might see a correlation that when we see bigger fires, there's more firemen present, or in the smaller fires, there's fewer firemen. And so reverse causation might be we assume that more firemen means there's bigger fires, or fewer firemen cause smaller fires, when in fact it should be the reverse. It wasn't A that caused B, it was B that caused A. Bigger fires, you tend to send more firemen. Smaller firemen, you don't need as many firemen. Likewise, Christmas. Christmas cards come before Christmas. We normally assume that which comes first causes which is second. So that would imply Christmas cards cause Christmas. Well, probably not. It's probably that Christmas causes Christmas cards. So that which came second, Christmas, caused that which came first, Christmas cards. So it's not always that which occurs first causes what happens second. So it helps to think through what's really going on. Common cause. Common cause means that both A and B are caused by C. Some examples of common cause would be, I might see more ice cream sales and more drownings. And I might assume, well, does ice cream sales cause drownings, or did more people drown because they ate ice cream? So in this case, I assume it's not the case that once you drown you want more ice cream. But actually it's probably more likely during the summer, more people are around the water, and also during the summer people eat more ice cream. So I might not have even thought about the third thing that causes both of them. So think through your questions, write them clearly, make sure you're not leading people to certain answers. And also remember that a lot of times people might not have an opinion, but it helps to be as clear as possible and think through what you're really asking. In fact, a lot of times what I find is if you ask people about, for example, do you support more educational spending? Well, people may not have any idea of how many billions of dollars are spent on education in the state, or how many thousands of dollars are spent per student, and they might say yes. If you give them how much is spent, they might say, well, that's a lot of money. And they might say no. Or if you ask them a different question is, how much would you be willing to spend? Because supposedly it's, if you just ask them, do you support it? They might be assuming, well, for free, I support a lot of things. I support everything that's free, as long as it's a good thing. So be careful in what you're asking, because normally things are going to take resources, and you might be interested in what people are willing to give up in order to get it. So I hope these things help. Thank you.